Isn't that cool this is? He'd have the pick kind of tucked into his fingers like this. He would play an upstroke. Meazzi units had this knob on the front where you could adjust the timing of the delays, and he would just basically time it to the song. So did you know that Hank Marvin, the legendary lead guitarist for the Shadows, was actually the first British guitarist to play a Fender Stratocaster? So today we're going to talk about Hank Marvin, and I'm going to give you some tips about how he got his sound and what was his playing techniques. But basically, Hank Marvin was one of the most influential lead guitarists back in the 60s. And just like with all great guitar heroes, Hank was very innovative and he was creative, and he developed his own unique signature sound that no one had ever heard before. And we're going to take a look at that today. But first of all, Hank was born Brian Rankin Robson. He was born in 1941 in Newcastle in England, which is where I'm from. And there's some other great guitar players from Newcastle, including Mark Knopfler from Dire Straits, who was influenced by Hank Marvin, amongst many others, Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton. Hank was kind of like a guitar hero to all the guitar heroes that came up in the 60s in England. But basically, back in 1958, Marvin joins this band called the Drifters, which would later change its name to the Shadows. And the Shadows became one of the most successful British bands in the 60s. And their singer was Cliff Richard, who was kind of like the Elvis of England. Cliff Richard's not that well known in America, but in England, he is so famous. He's like a national treasure. Cliff Richard decides to buy Hank Marvin a guitar because he didn't have a great guitar. So Hank gets this Fiesta Red Stratocaster, and it has this wang bar on it, or this tremolo arm on it, and Hank didn't even know what that did when he first got the guitar, but through playing it he realized that you could mimic the sound of a human voice with this little machine here. And back in those days, you didn't have like slinky strings like they have today. Strings were very much heavier, like gauge 13 strings, almost like acoustic strings, and so it was difficult to kind of get So it's difficult to tremolo the strings like that, but you could do it with this tremolo arm. And create that kind of almost human-like effect of vibratoing the sound. And that is one of the core principles of Hank Marvin's playing. He would always approach the guitar as if it was like a voice and singing a song. And there's a reason why often you'll see these videos of Hank playing in front of huge arenas full of people all listening to him play, because rather than just being a kind of a show-off shredder guitar player, he was someone that knew how to really make the guitar sing. So one of the band's biggest hits was Apache, and this is a perfect example of Hank's kind of playing. So let's take a listen here. This is so cool. This is Apache. Look at these dudes here. Very haunting melody. It's that strum. His hands on the tremolo the whole time. Isn't that cool this is, this like dynamic change here. So just listen to how atmospheric and dramatic that sound is. That song was released in 1960, and Apache shot to #1 in the UK charts, and it stayed there for 5 weeks. And it really kind of established the Shadows as one of the leading rock and roll bands in the UK. And as the 60s rolled on, the Shadows continued to dominate the British music scene. They released hit after hit, and Marvin's guitar playing was the sort of center stage for that. So Hank's known for his very meticulous attention to detail when it came to his gear. So his secret weapon of choice was the Stratocaster, specifically a 1959 model with a Fiesta Red finish. I'll grab mine here. Now this is one of the 50 Squire models, and it's new, but it does a great job. I really like the way these guitars sound. So Hank was using this Vox AC30, which is a real beast of an amp, and he would crank up the treble and bass to 10, and it creates this very kind of chimey type of sound. But at the same time, Hank was able to kind of get this kind of presence and this kind of almost like this really powerful sound, even though the sound is kind of twangy and reverby. When you listen to it, it's a magnificent sound. And one of the ways that he did that was through his picking technique. So Hank's kind of known for using a lot of upstrokes, and he would use the kind of side of the pick and kind of dig into the pick and create a very strong connection where the notes would really jump out at you, almost like rest strokes, like on a... You can create a really fantastic tone by using rest strokes on a classical guitar, and that's when you'll pluck a string and you kind of pluck it downwards, and then your finger rests on the note behind it, and it creates this really strong connection with the note. And Hank would kind of almost do that in reverse, where he would use the side of the pick like this, and he'd have the pick kind of tucked into his fingers like this, and then he would play an upstroke and create this really warm sound. It's kind of like every single note counts, you know, and he's not just shredding up and down, but he's really making each note really sing. But Marvin's sound wasn't just about his guitar and his amp. He also made extensive use of echo. He was like one of the first guys to really develop the echo sound. So back in the 50s, you had a lot of kind of rockabilly music like Elvis. They would put this slapback echo on the vocal, and even like guitarists like Scotty Moore would do that actually on their guitars as well. But it was a signature sound. It was like one little slap echo. And a lot of guitar players had started to kind of experiment with this idea, like Scotty Moore and Chet Atkins and Les Paul. And they were using very expensive studio equipment like plate reverbs and using tape machines to create echo effects, which was fantastic. But a company in Italy started to make this machine that kind of simulated the sound of a slapback rockabilly echo, and it was called a Meazzi tape echo unit, and it was originally designed for vocals. But one of Hank's friends had this machine and he couldn't really get on with it. He was like, I don't really know what to do with this thing, it doesn't sound that great. So he let Hank use it, and Hank immediately fell in love with it. It basically created this almost like ethereal, otherworldly, haunting sound, and that became the signature hallmark sound of the Shadows. So the first echo unit model used by Hank was this SEP Meazzi Model F, and it featured 5 different heads for multiple echoes, and additionally it had this optional variable speed drive for this magnetic drum that would kind of move round and round, and you could change the delay times, and it generated all these different kind of echo repeats. What was cool about it in comparison to some of the other kind of tape echoes is you could create these complex echo patterns, kind of like this. You see how it's got that kind of little pattern to it? Hank would use those, and they are multi-head tape echoes, creating that kind of pattern. So you had all these different tape heads, and you can kind of move them around and change the speed of it, and you can create different rhythms. And Hank would use different types of speeds and rhythms on every kind of song, and it made this kind of unique sound. What's cool about the multi-head tape echoes is, I'll show you here on mine. All right, so I got this Strymon Volante pedal here. It's a really cool pedal for getting this kind of sound, but you can use all kinds of different delays to do this, or you could even use 2 different delays together to get these kind of sounds. But let me just kind of show you what's going on with this. This particular delay pedal can simulate the sound of like the old drum echo units, which would be like the Meazzi or Binson Echo Rec and those kinds of things. So that's like this kind of sound here. And if you go to over here to tape, it's going to give you more of an echoplex type sound. Or it can also simulate the sound of like a studio tape, like an Ampex or something. But let me just kind of show you a little bit about how to kind of get the Hank Marvin type sounds. So I'm going to start here by showing you the heads here. So basically, the Meazzi had five heads, like I was saying before, but this unit's got 4 heads, but you can make them feedback and stuff. But you can get these really cool rhythms. So first of all, this is how you engage the head. So if I just turn this one on number 4, that's going to give you basically just a single delay. And then these 3 other heads are subdivisions of that delay. So if I put on head number 2, that's going to subdivide that in half. And then if I put on number 3, that's going to give me like a dotted 8th note in between. And then all 4 on, so it's like 16th notes basically. But Hank would often use these kinds of types of sounds here, where you'd have like these rhythms like that. And this button here is how you adjust the time. So you can go from a slow to a fast. And he would just adjust, like those Meazzi units had this big black knob on the front where you could adjust the timing of the delays. And he would just basically time it to the song. So, you know, if he was doing Apache, he would just get the echo timing right. Now, once you've got that going, you've got your heads, you can make the heads actually feed back into each other, which creates that kind of reverby sound. And so basically you can make any of the heads feed back, which means the echoes will kind of loop round back inside each other, back inside themselves. So for example, if I turn the feedback on head 3 there, you start to get these cool reverby sounds. So one of the other things here is the sound of the drum echo is very bright. So you get this kind of like, but you can adjust that with this wear here. And what that does is it simulates the sound of like the tape heads getting kind of worn down, and you lose some of the high end. And you can actually get this really beautiful kind of warm sound by adjusting the wear here to give you that kind of analog warmth. This mechanics knob here will actually create the sound of almost like a chorusing sound of where the tape is kind of moving and flanging, and the tape would be like crinkling and stuff. So it creates this kind of almost like Memory Man style effects, where you can hear the warble of the tape like that. So you can create some cool effects like that. You know, just a little bit of that would be cool, and then bring the wear to this, just to maybe round about there to get a nice warm sound. Okay, then you can adjust the overall repeats here from very kind of dry like that to create these kind of reverby sounds. Also with these units, it's got this spacing here, because some of those old units like the Meazzi, the heads wouldn't necessarily be evenly spaced out. So that's how they would create those interesting rhythms too. So right here, the heads are evenly spaced out. But if I adjust them here, the echoes start to kind of gather up in the middle. So you can hear that kind of triplet there. Another big part of Hank's sound actually is, if you look at this Strat here, I'm actually using a wound third string, and that's how they played them back in those days. They always had the wound string, the third string would be wound, which makes it a real bear to play, and it's kind of more difficult to keep it in tune as well actually. But that's a big part of the sound of the Shadows, is that wound third string, because it gives that note when you're playing these. It gives it a different kind of tonality when you're hitting that third string. So that's an interesting thing. All right, so it's a great unit, and then you can put it over to the tape as well, and it kind of warms it up a little bit more, gives it a bit of a cleaner sound, and you can kind of get some really great kind of 60s echoey sounds with this unit here. So Hank Marvin is an absolute legend. From his early days with the Shadows, he went on just to become super successful as a solo artist and celebrity. And he's left this kind of indelible mark on the history of rock and roll with his amazing, innovative guitar playing. And his influence can be heard in the music of countless guitar players who have followed in his footsteps. And even, today, his music continues to inspire and captivate people. And Hank's unique sound and style really helped to shape the course of rock and roll history.